Craft of the heart. Uh, the uh, the ideas of craft are really appealing to me. My dad, an interesting fellow. He was a lawyer in Latvia, and then with the war and those refugee days, 4 years I think they were stuck in Germany. And then coming to Canada, he couldn't revive his law career. 2 kids, mom was working in a bank, so they just had to survive. So he's a really hardworking man. So first of all, he just started in a factory sweeping the floors. I found that really, really difficult because the atmosphere was so coarse, the language was coarse, and he was a very cultured man. Anyway, he worked nights studying electronics, and then he got a really good job in Motorola, and he liked making stuff. So he really liked electronics. In fact, he built our color TV. They had a company called Heathkit, and that's when they still used tubes rather than chips. And so that would have been late 50s, I guess. Yeah, he built a television. He's quite a competent man. And then Motorola went broke in Canada. Didn't go broke. It shifted its entire operation from Canada to the United States. And then my dad was unemployed. And he and mom had just purchased a house, which had a huge mortgage, which took 25 years to pay off. And suddenly he's unemployed. He said that's one of the worst moments of his life. We've got this financial burden, young kids in school. Mom's salary was minimal in a bank. So then he studied accounting. He's just one of those survivors. Studied accounting, and then he got a job as a minor clerk in an engineering firm. And then in that engineering firm, one of the partners wanted to go off and start his own company, a Latvian man who was good friends with. So he took my dad along, and my dad had a pretty good position in the accounting department of this new company. The real survivor. And he loved classical music, and he had a very good voice. He's a tenor. So he was part of a men's choir in Latvia and then also in Canada. But during those refugee years in Germany, when everyone is hustling to survive, they formed a men's choir of, I think, 6 men. And they would go around the local refugee settlements. What the Americans did in the American sector is any German families that were still surviving in the apartment buildings, which worked, they just cut them in half. So the German family had to figure out how to live in one half of the apartment, and the refugee, the Latvians, Lithuanians, Poles, had to live in the other half, which was a pretty reasonable kind of solution. So there are all these different kind of refugee settlements. So it wasn't like a refugee camp, say in Pakistan, or so. It wasn't that kind of horror, but it was tough, obviously. And so these 6 men would go around singing for their supper. Basically, they just put on a little concert and then ask for Dana, which is what I'm doing now. So I never thought of that before. Sing for your supper. Anyway, he collected money and that helped. Then he worked in a bakery, found a job, a very good worker. And the baker was a German bakery. And you think about this is like, Germany's been destroyed. Stuff is still going on. And the baker had this high sense of quality, so that if he baked a loaf of bread and it was cracked along the top, it was because of hard crust, then he wouldn't sell it. So my dad, so great. So my dad would come from the bakery with suitcases full of bread and then pass it around. So he was a survivor, a hard worker. And he was he was an intellectual and he loved knowledge. He was always studying. You know, he had a lectern that he stood at, and he was always taking notes, notebooks and notebooks, and about everything, about science, about art, about literature, about electronics, about history. He was always studying. So his highest value was knowledge. So, you know, the kind of phrase that I remember that was bandied around in our family, when you have read more, you'll know more. And so that when we were big readers, my brother, me, my mom, dad, my mom could read. She can read in Russian. She could read in German. She could read in French. She could read in English. She could read in Latvian. A very good linguist. Um, very good heart, compassionate woman. Dad was very generous and moral, so I had a really good background. And I'm super grateful. But so Dad's emphasis on intellect, of course, influenced me. So the more you read, the better. So the idea of knowledge was important for me. But then when I got to this yearning for this experience of silence, whatever way you want to describe that, you know, after a while, you kind of realize, well, that this isn't working. Thought, basically thought and information and knowledge, that's not working. But still, I had the underlying conditioning that, no, you just keep reading more and you'll figure this out. So you kind of, this isn't working. You go to the library shelves, somewhere in here, in among all these titles, I'm sure there's the answer. But it never was the answer. And so coming to Luangpor Cha was really, really good, because then here was a man that was not stupid. He's a smart man, but he wasn't an intellectual per se. That wasn't his modus operandi, just coming from thought. Not that my dad is heartless or anything like that, but that was his top priority. So then meeting Luangpor Cha, he says, no, it's your jitta that you have to study. It's not about language. And that was a big shift in a possibility, but I still had the habit of accumulating knowledge. So when I was asked to teach retreats, I was nervous. I didn't want to do it, but having faith in my teachers, I gave it a go. And then, of course, I thought, knowledge now. So I'd memorize all these lists, and then I would give a Dhamma talk with all these lists, and I thought I was really cool. You know, and then of course I thought I had to give everyone their money's worth, so the poor people would get another list every night, which is just, you just battered after a while, please. And I think you know the story which I tell, that in one of the Tisarana retreats, I had just done like 3 really good lists. I mean, they were good lists. They were 10s or 12s, really right on an hour and a half, and you know. And Jim Howe comes to me and he says, Bhante, your talks are great, but please, enough with your lists. I just can't take any more. So then the idea of craft became much more appealing. And why I find craft appealing, say, like I've learned a lot. Again, as a younger monk, because there weren't many monks, I was usually involved in management. And so I'd be the work monk, but the work monk actually doesn't do any work. He manages the work. And I'd like to learn how to do that or that or that. So laterally, at Tisarana, I didn't have to do that. Other monks are doing that. So I could learn carpentry and weaving in the last 6, maybe 10 years. And that's been really rewarding. And what I like about craft is that you have to prove yourself with the reality of the material you're working with. And that is not intellectual. It's like a dentist has to prove their skills with a person's mouth with really low tolerance, really tight. And that's why I admire the skills of a dentist. They have to make their statement in reality. It can't be abstract. And they can make a mistake and they'll be costly. The same with knee surgeons. I have heard this, so I heard. So, so there's something about I find proving myself in reality. So I can read about. So what I do, I don't know how to do joinery, and I look at a YouTube thing, and I look at some drawings, and I watch some things. I ask Ajahn Pavara, and then slowly I learn, and then I make mistakes. Um, and then I learn again, and then finally one day it kind of comes together. I'm going to make a nice piece of furniture, and that to me is craft. Craft is the participation in a real time situation, and it's not abstracted thought. Okay, so the craft of the heart is your heart is not an abstract idea. It's not like a list of 10 things, or like even you could say that like some cars and all. Yeah, that's the language you use, but the reality of your heart is that you suffer or you don't suffer. You feel anger, you don't feel anger. And that's where you have to prove yourself or understand yourself, and obviously in the reality of things. So if you get, I found that if I was too conceptual, and I was analyzing or trying to compare my experience to one of the lists, I found that I kind of got in the way of awareness. Whereas if I trusted awareness more and I just waited and watched, got some instruction, and then I would see, oh yeah, that's how it works. So awareness to me, I could see is also wisdom if you give it a chance. So if we were to just sit outside and watch the birds. We might not be ornithologists or bird watchers, but just by observing, like I think last year I was watching the plovers. Are they plovers over there? The big white ones anyway. I was watching them. And then I could just by watching them every day a little bit. I think I had binoculars one year, watching. Oh, that's the behavior of plovers. I mean, I can't remember quite what it was. And that's just natural insight. That's just the way, if you give awareness a chance, it will show you the way things are. So awareness is both, for me, the mode of understanding, but in and of itself, it is peaceful. And that's perhaps the more difficult thing to realize, because mostly we are aware of things and we're focused on things and we're doing things. So it's always like a control or manipulation. And what this craft of the heart takes me to is like these different ways of talking about. So if we could go back to Luangpor Duns, which I really like that. I refer to that a lot. So it's one of the tools I use a lot. The mind going out is the cause. The result of the mind going out is suffering. Now, why is that suffering? It's suffering in terms of peace. It's not suffering in terms of Vedana. Like if you're enjoying a gautam in the morning and it's nourishing, that you're going out into it. Obviously, that's not what he's talking about. It's just that the mind always having to be on an object. If it doesn't turn back, you never realize the peace of the mind. Sometimes you have gautam and it feels really beautiful, but sometimes you have toothache and you can't eat it, etc., etc. So we're not denying that the mind going out can have pleasant consequences and unpleasant consequences, but we're saying, well, have you ever looked back? Have you ever had a look at awareness itself? So then Luangpor Dun's second statement is, the mind knowing the mind is the cause, the result of the mind knowing the mind is the end of suffering. That's really a curious kind of statement, because what do you mean, the mind knowing the mind? Where is the mind? So you try to find the mind as an object. The mind is not an object, it is awareness itself. And that's where you can get really messed up with some of the analogies and metaphors that, like if I use the metaphor background, foreground, so this is language, and language objectifies things. So I say background for awareness, and then you try to find the background, but that's not it. Just because you have to use language, language is objective, then you think, well, okay, the background must be a thing, but it can't be a thing. Awareness is not a thing. So then, then I use the page and the print or the ocean and so on. Another way to consider that is you know that you know. Now, that might not sound like much, but oftentimes you don't know that you know because you are in some thinking mode, planning, past, future, past, future, past, future. So the recommendation always in spiritual life is present moment awareness. Let go of the past, let go of the future, present moment awareness, present moment awareness. And it really doesn't matter what your experience is. If your experience is hot and sticky, fine. If it's cold, fine. It's about knowing that you know. So right now I'm sitting here and I know that I know. And if I just allow that to be that way, you notice that's actually very peaceful. You know that you know. But then if you ask, well, what do you know? That it's hot? No, 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 no. Or that it's cold? No, 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 no. You know that you know. There's presence. There's awareness. There's knowing. It's like this. Benyang niang, puru, puto, all that language is pointing to the same thing. So if you go back to Luangpor's constant encouragement to us, and I often say this, imagine like Luangpor Sumedho's, he's done the work. He's been at this for what, 60 plus years, probably 60 vasa. And at the end of his life, he's constantly saying, I hope he lives long, but I shouldn't have said that. May he live long. But in the twilight of his career, put it that way, what does he say? He says like this, or he says trust and awareness. Now that's not like encyclopedic. You'd think he should say more, but you notice that artists or craftspeople, anyone with skills, always moves. What I've noticed is to the most elegant. Like I think a programmer, anyone who does code, you usually always moves to the most elegant solution. Or say Japanese architecture, minimalist, they kind of always move to the most simple kind of statement of craft or whatever. And so I think Luangpor Sumedho's just honed his life down to it's like this. And you think, oh, come on. 60 years, is that all I get? It's like this. I know it's like this. How else could it be? And then you're thinking. So to me, what that statement is the silence after the statement. When I say it's like this, I know that I know. And that is sufficient. But very shortly, doesn't take long for habit to want to do something, for habit to want to read something, understand something. And that's the restlessness of tanha. Tanha is a restless kind of energy. And then, but it's like this. I know it's like this. Come on. Yeah, but where's the silence afterwards? And so that's why I think I'm encouraging this sense of silence after the statement. I know that I know. And if that is trusted and maintained, it's very peaceful, very silent. So I encourage, and that to me is a craft in the sense that it has to take place in my own experience. It can't be something that Luangpor Sumedho persuades me to as a kind of a belief. No, I have to first of all understand, why does he say that? What's he pointing to? And that's the kind of questioning a teacher might offer. not a solution so much as a way of looking and a way of inclining your mind or an attitude. And then, why are you saying that, Luangpor? Because he certainly, like in the early days of Chithurst, he spent a whole year teaching Paticca in a kind of way that Luangpor Buddhadasa taught it. And certainly he did that, and that was really helpful. But it always came back to the same thing. It's like this. And then he would indicate that with Phassa Vedana Tanha Upadana, that construct, to see where the attachment took place, where the sense of self arose in that Phassa Vedana Tanha Upadana. And then he would teach a lot the sound of silence, which he doesn't teach that so much, but he still does. Four Noble Truths, always coming back to that. So they're kind of like Four Noble Truths. I think you all know he has just mined that year in and year out, year in and year out. And then if you do that as a kind of craft, you get really, really good at recognizing tanha, recognizing the suffering of attachment to tanha. You just know it very, very well. And that is more of craft too. Like when I say, when I was learning how to do a mortise and tenon joint, a mortise is, where's the furniture? So a mortise, like if you want to join two pieces of wood, you put a square hole in that one, and you put a tongue on this one, that tucks into there. That's called a mortise and a tenon. And that's a basic construct of joinery, of furniture. If you learn that, you can make a lot of things. So, okay, I can do that. I read about it. And then chop, 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 chop. And the whole thing splits up on me, or chop, 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 chop. It's too big or it's too small. So I struggle with the workmanship until I am proficient with making a mortise and making a tenon, making a mortise, making a tenon, making a mortise. And then I have the joy of putting some pieces together, and I can do 4 pieces. And I think my largest piece of furniture is a big bench outside the monastery, 64 mortise and tenons. Oh, I was really proud of that. Wow. I'm really, really happy because I did it. I kind of pulled it off. But with that's repetition. That's repetition. But it's not a kind of stupid repetition like a parrot or something like that. It's intelligent because each time I try to cut the mortise and cut the tenon, I have to be attentive to it. I have to do it right. Each time I have to do it right. And so I get better. So what is the repetition in the craft of the heart? It's the repetition of, it's like this. It's the repetition of knowing that you know. It's the repetition of seeing why am I dissatisfied now? Where is that coming from? What does that feel like? And that repeated investigation, again, if you go back to my own constant example of fear and social anxiety, I had to constantly look at what is the problem here? And until I really saw clearly, it was the tanha of not wanting the Vedana, not wanting the feeling. And I had to do that again and again and again and again. That's craft. So craft is boring. People say, oh, it must be so peaceful to make weaving. No, it's not. It's boring sometimes, and it's frustrating. And sometimes I ruin a piece of work and I try to sneak it into the garbage so no one will see. And it's real life. So the idea that craft is somehow in itself peaceful is just not the way it is. So the same with our meditation, our cultivation of skillful means. First of all, you have to work with the material you have. This is the kind of, whether you're a maple tree, you're an oak tree, or you're a piece of bamboo, this is what you're working with. And then you have to kind of figure out where there is the loss of wakefulness, where attention gets lost into worry or self-disparagement or the kind of lostness of the mind. And then how can I kind of remember to reawaken the mind? And that's about your mind. And that's where faith arises, doesn't it? So talking about faith yesterday, I was also latterly then contemplating, well, that the way I teach now, as opposed to those beautiful lists that I used to teach at, um, which were okay, but now I'm just teaching from things that I know work for me. So I have faith in that, but I don't know if it works for you. I have no idea. I always wondered, how does your mind work? Because I can't read your mind. And hopefully there's something in what I say is helpful too, but I don't know. I can't know. And I've I prefer that to actually just telling you dogma or doctrine, because you can read that in a book, but then you have to try for yourself. So your mind, your conditioning, like family conditioning, again, if my family had been violent or dysfunctional or alcoholic, I'd have a whole different set of parameters which I would have to work with, obviously, and I'm whatever. But I had these kind of parameters. So your childhood conditions you, your culture conditions you, but all that conditioning is the object. It's the way the mind works. It's the way you interpret or judge or feel self-conscious. But the knowing, the puru, the awareness, is not cultural. It just is. It's like this. So that as this retreat sort of, it's in its midpoint, I guess, 19 today. Let's say, like, that at day in the middle of the retreat, you feel like it's going well. Sadhu, that's a feeling. Be careful. Why not? Tomorrow, it might feel pathetic, but that's okay, because your refuge is not in a sense of success. If your refuge is in a sense of success, and we all know this, then the next day you're looking for success, and then you fail, and then you beat yourself up, and I'll never do another retreat again the rest of my life, that kind of thing. So Penyang Ni Eng, it's like this: present moment awareness, present moment awareness. When you really trust that, then the fluctuations of success and failure and happiness and unhappiness, they're there. Yeah, they happen, but you have something deeper in your heart. And then the successes are confirming something great. You feel, yeah, this did work well, but you're not looking for that. It's no longer a function of greed or wanting. So whatever you're feeling now, awareness is not dependent on that. The feeling is dependent on awareness, but awareness is not dependent on that. So stay with that. And then if tomorrow you feel even better, good on you. And then better and better, good on you. Great. But if it changes, it's supposed to change. That's the way it's supposed to be. Any self-definition you come up like, I am not getting anywhere, that is deadly. That's deadly. I'm not getting anywhere in my practice. That's a sense of atta, self, time, ego, blah, blah, blah. And that is a lot of suffering. Whereas I know that I feel hopeless is actually very peaceful. So then you play around. Okay, I am the most pathetic. All the other people are sitting still, and they're all really, really peaceful. I can see, and I'm just a basket case, and I'm just hopeless, and I'm blah, 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 that kind of language. Well, that sense of self is a habit, and if you believe in it, okay. If you want to become hopeless, go ahead. Think hopeless thoughts. Go ahead, go for it. For the rest of the retreat, think, I'm bad. I'm bad. I'm hopeless. I'm pathetic. I hate Viradhammo. Just go ahead, go for it. And when you think of it, in a humorous way, see how ridiculous it is to think yourself anything. Okay, I would think the other. These other people, they're pathetic. Look at that one moved, and that one ate too much cake. And look, that one doesn't walk mindfully. And she finished after half an hour. And then, okay, do that for the rest of the retreat, right? You kind of see how ridiculous the sense of self can be. And then, oh, this is what judgment feels like. And there's the peace. I know that I know. Or this is what self-criticism feels like. Ah, feels like this. I know that I know. There's the peace. There's the peace. There's the silence. So you keep breaking up the habits of ego and thought and all that into what? Self-doubt feels this way. Hopelessness feels this way. And then you have the background. It's always there. Peace. That's a theory. And then you've got your own mortise and tenon to work with. So you have to keep your chisel sharp, right? If you're doing woodwork, if you have dull chisels, it'll make it. And what is keeping the chisels sharp? I would say learning how to focus, doing some anapanasati, focusing on your feet touching the ground, focusing into the present moment, but not an end in itself, just to keep the kind of clarity of mind and then see where the craft takes you. So let's stretch your legs a bit and sit a bit.